Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 19th of July. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, no matter what part of Alaska you're in. You can always find your forecast on the phone at 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, or one click will take you to your local forecast office in Juneau, Fairbanks, or Anchorage. You can find links to your Alaska Aviation Weather Unit's forecast for many of your general aviation needs. And of course, you can find hydrology links that'll help you understand more about what's happening in your local rivers and watersheds, including flood warnings, which we'll talk about here in a minute. If you can't find any of those things that you need, please let me know. david.snider@noaa.gov is the easiest way to find me online. As we said, there is a flood warning for the Mendenhall River that's going to go until 10 o'clock on Friday morning. And with more information about that, let's turn to our hydrologist out of Juneau. Our service hydrologist, Aaron Jacobs, was on the scene and has some good pictures to share with us, as well as our hydrologist out of the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, Selena Van Breukelen. Here's more information on what they saw earlier today. At around 7:36 this morning, river gauge reports on the Mendenhall River indicated the Suicide Basin Glacier Dammed Lake had begun to flood. That water was pouring into the Mendenhall River.
Hi, I'm Aaron Jacobs, service hydrologist for the National Weather Service in Juneau. We're here at the end of U Drive along the Mendenhall River. Time is about 11:45. And as you can see to my left, here's the Mendenhall River. The current stage is 9.5 feet and rising. This is all from the glacial dam release of Suicide Basin into the Mendenhall River. We're here at this residence. They're making preparations for the flooding event that's going to peak sometime this evening. And sunny out, and people wouldn't expect that there would be flooding, but on these types of events, we can have some pretty high impacts to the community of Juneau and the Mendenhall Valley. More to come later on. Thanks.
The Mendenhall River. It's about noon. The stage of the Mendenhall River is just a little bit under 10 feet. And this is the Mendenhall River at the Back Loop Bridge.
A flood warning is in effect until 10 o'clock Friday morning. The crest should occur tonight, Thursday night, around 11.9 feet. That means water could be in Mendenhall Lake Campground, and at 10.9 feet, U Drive will be impassable. Stay out of the water and stay tuned for more information from your National Weather Service office. As always, stay tuned to weather.gov/Juneau. Listen to NOAA Weather Radio, or you can check the river gauge yourself anytime at weather.gov/APRFC, which is the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center for short. Turning our attention to fire weather now, you can see high fire danger continues across many parts of the upper Yukon, into the middle Yukon, and then down around the Tanana Valley and westward on the northern side of the Alaska Range. There has not been a whole lot of rain recently. However, cooler weather has been setting in, and humidity has been going up lately with the weather change and the clouds coming in. So fire danger should be lower than it has been in general for most of the earlier part of the season. So conditions aren't quite as bad as they have been, and fire situations in many local communities has been improving. But as always, make sure that you're checking in with your local fire officials before you do any open burning. Thankfully, the wind has also been down in many communities. Let's take a look at the visible satellite picture, and as we get things going here, you can see there is plenty of sunshine across south central and the eastern interior earlier today. Clouds are popping up across many parts of southeast. Not a whole lot of rain under that. We have high pressure out across parts of the Bering, but the overall controlling feature here is low pressure a little bit further to the west, and that's helping to steer in a broad southerly flow up the west coast and keep things very warm. Once again, as you look at the loop, you'll notice moisture is moving in off the Bering Sea and the Chukchi Sea into the interior. This is all associated with a front that has been draped across the Brooks Range for about the last day or so now. It moved ashore yesterday across the North Slope and brought with it quite a bit of wind, some areas of fog with that, and temperatures ahead of that were well into the 60s for many locations. Well, those temperatures have fallen considerably since then, and areas of fog and rain are found across the North Slope. In the meantime, many across south central and southwest have seen temps in the 60s and 70s once again today, and high pressure is trying to work its way into the east. We've got a ridge shaping up right here across the Gulf in south central into southeast, and so many locations in southeast are on that warmer side, the northwesterly flow that's been working its way into the region and keeping things generally dry and stable for the time being. So the question is, when are you going to get any more rain? And for many locations, especially in southern third of Alaska out to the west, it may be several several days. It looks like, generally speaking, it will be a fairly dry trend for most locations in most parts of Alaska. We do have low pressure up across the North Slope at 1,013 millibars. On the south side of that, there's some rain on the south side of the slopes of the Brooks Range, but also across the North Slope. High pressure is also trying to stabilize things and slow the wind down after that last frontal passage. Out across the west, low pressure in the western Bering at 1,007 millibars. Here's the high trying to hold that at bay and chip away at some of the clouds and low deck there that you see across many locations. Low pressure sitting across the North Pacific, 1,012 millibars there. That's pushing rain into the Alaska Peninsula. A weak weather disturbance is slowly falling apart, moving closer to Kodiak. And then some rain showers there closer to higher. And east of that is where we start to get back into shower and thunderstorm activity. So it's pretty far away from most areas in Alaska at this point tonight. Looking up north, fog is expected to continue across the North Slope. High pressure will sit across the Bering at 1,020 millibars. You can see a low still sitting in the same place across the North Pacific, 1,013 millibars there. And that light south and southeasterly breeze will continue. Watch for showers across the Alaska Range and also across parts of southeastern Alaska tonight. Most areas, again, will be looking at dry weather, but don't be surprised if you're down around Cook Inlet if you run into a little bit of fog. And you should see some coastal areas of fog across the Bering Sea coast as well. So plan for some poor visibility to start in the morning. And of course, when you see the aviation forecast, some of that IFR will also make sense. As you look at Friday's weather, high pressure sits right on top of the Seward Peninsula, 1,023 millibars. This entire ridge here is controlling most of the last frontier's weather. As you look out to the east, generally dry weather is expected across most of the panhandle there. The winds shouldn't be too terribly bad. Watch for showers around Kodiak Island, down toward the Alaska Peninsula. A few pop-up showers across parts of southwest and the Alaska Range. A better chance of seeing some more steadier rainfall up across the Brooks Range and the Kobuk and Noatak valleys. And you'll get back into more shower activity as you get into the upper Yukon and western parts of the Yukon itself. Across the Bering, that steady southerly flow is still kind of holding on here across the eastern third of the Bering. Areas around St. Paul, St. George, and St. Matthew will probably be looking at least some low clouds, most likely some times of fog, and maybe a little bit of light rain. The rain should be mostly off to your west, though. For Adak and Atka, so watch for some more rainfall there. Atka, you've had a little bit of rainfall today, so have you in Adak. That low pressure system across the North Pacific will continue that feed of warm and wet air, slowly pushing that in to parts of southwestern Alaska. And as we get into Saturday, you can see that circulation's pretty much gone away, but we still have that broad flow working up the west coast of Alaska. That's because high pressure is still sitting across the southern Gulf at 1,035 millibars. This is going to keep an area of low stratus and probably some fog really close to the outer coast of southeastern Alaska. Don't be surprised if you see that slowly sneaking its way into places like Sitka, maybe past Port Alexander and into the Dixon entrance. But by and large, this is not going to be a huge precipitation maker. Showers will continue across the Alaska Range there, and showers are also working their way up the west coast into Norton Sound, the Seward Peninsula. Areas like Nome, Shishmaref, and Kotzebue will probably be looking at some continued areas of light rainfall going into the next week. And as you look at parts of the Bering Sea, do expect to see that low pressure will sit across the central and western parts of the ocean there as we get into your early part of the weekend. Not a whole lot of change in visibility is expected, and we don't expect a whole lot to change across the region for that southern flow as well. So things will stay fairly warm across the area as we get through your Saturday and probably into Sunday. A look up north shows that high pressure now is starting to gain some ground across the northern part of the Yukon. With that, we expect to see some showers developing across the eastern Brooks Range, but fog is also going to be fairly likely across some parts of the North Slope, especially the coastal areas and over the ice. So while it is warming up, do expect some poor visibility from time to time. But things to really take away from this is most of the start of the weekend for most parts of South Central, most in Southwest, most in the interior, and most of Southeast should be warm and dry as we get into your Saturday and probably in many parts most of Sunday as well. Let's take a look at those temperatures now. As we get into Friday morning, most areas are going to start off fairly mild, 40s and 50s across the region, 48 in Nome, 46 in Shishmaref, 52 around Kotzebue, even 40s for Kivalina and northward into the North Slope. Temperatures are cooling down after that frontal passage there. We were into the 60s and saw morning minimums that were fairly mild. Now we're back into the 30s there. Once you get into the middle interior, the eastern interior, temps are in the 40s and 50s. Fairbanks 53, South Central lower to mid 50s for a start on Friday. Southeast upper 40s and lower 50s for you. High temperatures by Friday blossom back into the 60s and 70s. In fact, McGrath could be pushing 80 degrees. Mid 70s for the Middle Tanana Valley, Eagle and Northway also fairly warm. Gulkana, Glen Allen area back in the upper 70s, maybe even pushing 80 degrees for some. If you're on the Kenai Peninsula from Homer to Kenai to Soldotna out toward Prince William Sound, temps will at least be in the mid to upper 60s, most likely in the lower to mid 70s as you get down toward the western part of the Kenai Peninsula. 61 around Kodiak, 50s and 60s for the Alaska Peninsula. Falls Pass, Cold Bay, things are looking really nice for you. 52 in St. Paul. Upper 60s and lower 70s for many parts of southeast. Saturday morning temperatures are going to be milder in the North Slope. Upper 30s to mid 40s for many locations. 50s across the Middle Tanana Valley in the upper Yukon. The lower Yukon also fairly warm. Look at Grayling, 57 degrees, 55 around Bethel, 54 degrees around McGrath. King Salmon and Dillingham, lower to mid 50s for many in Bristol Bay, 46 in St. Paul. Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, mid-40s expected for you. Sandpoint closer to 50. Southeast starts off Saturday in the low to mid-50s. South Central also fairly mild in the lower 50s. By Saturday, we're still on slow roast. The interior getting another possibility of summer here, it looks like. Upper 70s to lower 80s for the Middle Tanana Valley. 60s for some of the North Slope by the afternoon on Saturday. South Central pushing 70. Kodiak about 60 degrees with southeast back in the upper 60s to mid 70s for Saturday.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to aviation now, we will start to see some changes up across the North Slope. Look for MVFR to linger closer to Barrow, Utqiagvik, down toward Wainwright, just offshore mainly and over the ice pack. You'll notice substantial amounts of improvement to VFR as you get from Kaktovik all the way westward toward Point Hope. And then once you get around to Point Hope down into Kotzebue Sound, you'll start to see that MVFR creeping back into the upper Koyukuk Valley, the middle Yukon Valley. And MVFR fairly widespread across the Gulf Coast, sneaking in a little bit across the southern third of southeast. Otherwise, IFR hit and miss across the Gulf, south of Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, and across most of the western Bering Sea and up into the Bering Strait. As we get into the afternoon, some of that IFR is going to creep eastward a little bit more into areas just offshore of southeast outer coast, with MVFR just a little bit further in. MVFR also sitting outside of Hitchett entrance over Homer, south of Kenai, over Kenai Peninsula, where that becomes IFR, and then no big change to IFR areas out in the west, with hit and miss IFR across the North Slope and around the Kobuk and Nuatak Valley just east of Kivalina and north of Kotzebue. IFR creeps further southward Saturday morning, closer to Utqiagvik and Barrow, closer to Wainwright, but other areas just offshore still sitting around MVFR. Look for MVFR to sneak in just a little bit more across the outer coast of southeast and into the Dixon entrance just a little bit. IFR expands across the Gulf, closer to Kodiak Island, in fact covering it up it looks like. IFR also sneaks into Kashamak Bay and south of Kenai. And MVFR conditions around most of Bristol Bay with some open spots there, but generally speaking IFR continues in the same spots in the Bering, including St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George. By the afternoon, IFR is still pushing eastward across the Bering Sea. You'll see it closer to Nunivak Island, still south of Macquarie and outside of the Kuskokwim Delta. IFR expands across most of the chain now. We'll see MVFR conditions across Shelikof Strait, but IFR is expected close to Kodiak, perhaps over it, and expands across the Gulf with areas in southeast looking at a little more MVFR south of Sitka and eastward toward Ketchikan and Annette. Northern areas, capital city included, should still be VFR, as is most of the interior, especially from Kotzebue Sound and points east. Let's take a look at your pass conditions in detail. Things up north will be the ones that change the most. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass should see some improvements. A start to MVFR as the day goes on. Looks like it'll turn over there by the afternoon after a morning start around VFR, but most areas up north are going to experience considerable improvement over the last couple days. Lake Clark, Merrill Pass, Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, and Isabel Pass all look to be pretty good for your Friday flying. Mentasta Pass, we're going to say VFR conditions there for Friday. Tanita Pass looks pretty good. Watch for a few afternoon cumulus clouds, but right now even convection seems to be fairly limited as we put a wrap on the week. Portage Pass looking to be VFR. Remember, you'll run into MVFR once you get outside of Hitchinbrook entrance, and Chilkoot and White Pass look pretty good. You may see some MVFR across the outer coast and the southern third of the Panhandle, but right now that looks to be about it. That cool wave coming in across the North Slope, you can see levels as low as 2,000 feet to about 6,000 feet as you reach the Brooks Range summits. South of that, we get back into 8, 10, and 12,000 foot levels there across the interior. The air is really warm. That continues for parts of southwestern Alaska as well. Levels from St. Lawrence Island all the way down to Kodiak Island, holding at around 12,000 feet. Levels just to the south of that start to cool off a little bit, and for most of southeast, you're looking at levels between 8 and about 10,000 feet for your Friday flying. Expect a little bit of icing if you're flying way up there, but the air is so warm, we're not really looking at any substantial icing threat for any low or general aviation concerns for the most part. Isolated moderate's possible, but you'll have to go pretty high up there out across the west, south of the Alaska Peninsula, and west of Kodiak Island, and also across the eastern Beaufort Sea. That'll be above 10,000 feet, and the threat remains isolated moderate. For jet stream, we see a pretty strong push coming in from the west across the north slope. Wind speeds there anywhere from 70 to about 80 knots coming from the west-northwest over the Brooks Range there. That is all associated with that push of cooler air that's been floating around. We've got another surge coming in across the Kamchatka Peninsula that'll race across the Aleutians, feeding into low pressure here across the North Pacific and another low across the Pacific Northwest. If you do the math, we still have that omega-shaped pattern. That blocking pattern will keep the weather kind of in check as we go into the weekend. You can see it more clearly here. Wind speeds zonal out of the west across the interior, 20 to 30 knots. Faster winds across the north at 50 knots. Low pressure south and west to Sand Point and Unalaska Dutch Harbor. You see that flow coming in from the west, 40 to 50 knots there. A northerly flow continues across southeast. Light winds 10 to 20 knots, and across the interior 15 to 30 at their best. A southerly flow into the Arctic with westerlies across the north slope and low pressure again across the North Pacific with a stronger low across the western Bering and wind speeds faster flowing into Russia. Turbulence generally below 4,000 feet. Watch for chop, hit and miss, especially near Kodiak Island.
The fourth planet from the sun. Welcome to Stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silvaplá Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. Last month on June 27th, Saturn and the Moon had a cozy conjunction on the same day that Saturn was at its closest approach to the Earth.
Well, this month, also on the 27th, we have another pairing of the Moon and a planet. This time, it's the fourth planet from the sun, the ever-popular and angry red planet Mars.
Speaking of angry, I'm a little upset about this pairing.
Oh, why so, James?
Well, on the same day that the red planet is at its closest to us, the Moon will also be turning red.
Wait, a total lunar eclipse? That sounds like great news.
Normally it would be, but because of the timing of the eclipse, all of us in North America will be on the daytime side of the Earth. So we won't get to see the eclipse.
Oh man, that's disappointing.
I know, right?
Well, wait a second. Here's an idea. All you have to do is go on vacation to either Europe, Africa, or Western Asia, then you'll be able to see it.
Exactly. But you see, my Stargazer Sky car has its scheduled annual maintenance that day, so I won't be going anywhere.
Ah, man, it's rough to be you. But, well, let's check out the sky on July 27th from the United States.
Mars has fascinated astronomers for centuries, especially when it came to its peculiar movement, brightness, and color changes.
Every 26 months or so, Mars goes from a pale orangish yellow to a bright orangish red. Mars got its name because its red color reminded the ancient Romans of blood, war, and violence. So they named it after their god of war.
So, every 26 months, the brightening of Mars reminded people of this celestial connection with the god of war, and they came to expect the unleashing of war, revolutions, disasters, and death.
But why does Mars change color, size, and brightness every 26 months? Well, let's find out.
If we view our solar system from high above the sun, we can see the orbits of both Earth and Mars. Earth takes a little more than 365 days to orbit the sun, while Mars takes almost 687 days. When Mars and Earth are at their closest to each other, Mars is said to be at opposition. When a planet is at opposition, it's exactly on the opposite side of the sky from the sun.
The tricky part about Martian oppositions is that they are not all created equal. For example, the Martian opposition of August 2003 was one of the closest oppositions in recorded history, where Earth and Mars were only 34.6 million miles apart.
Compare that to the opposition of March 2012, when Mars is a whopping 62.6 million miles from Earth. The reason that Mars's distance varies so much is because of the shape of Mars's orbit.
Johannes Kepler demonstrated that planetary orbits are not perfect circles, but a shape called an ellipse. Mars's orbit is more elliptical than Earth's, so there are times when Mars is much closer to the Sun than others.
When a planet is at its closest to the Sun, we call that perihelion. The perihelion point for Mars lies in the constellation Aquarius. The point when a planet is farthest from the Sun is called aphelion, and for Mars, that point is in Leo the Lion.
Perihelion and aphelion are on opposite sides of a planet's orbit, and as a result are on the opposite sides of the sky. So if you look at the zodiac, what constellation is on the opposite of the sky from Leo the Lion?
Ta-da! It's Aquarius. So if the Sun is in Leo and Mars is in or near Aquarius, as it is this year, you get a close, bright opposition. But switch it around, and if the Sun is in Aquarius and Mars is in Leo, you get a distant and faint opposition. So get outside on Friday night, July 27th, 2018, and get the best view of Mars we've had since 2003.
And if you happen to be vacationing in Europe or Africa that day, check out the total lunar eclipse as well. Keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a look at your sea ice edge, and you'll notice not a whole lot of changes across the North Slope's coastline today, this 19th of July. As always, you can check the very latest at weather.gov/anchorage/ice, but your Alaska Sea Ice program folks tell me that we'll continue to see very little change in the next couple days. A lot of warm air is moving up over the region over the last several days. Now we've got a cooler westerly flow moving through, so probably what you see is what you get, at least for the next couple days. But make sure you check in any time to check on the concentration and the movement of this ice, as well as your outlook over the next several weeks. Here's a look at what we see in Juneau and southeast for tomorrow and into Saturday. West to northwesterly winds coming down parallel to the outer coast, 20 to 25 knots with 5 to 7 foot seas in most areas. Light winds on the inside, especially around Stevens Passage down toward the Dixon entrance in the Clarence Strait region. Southerlies a little stronger in the Lynn Canal, 15 knots and 3 foot seas. They're down to 10 knots and 2 foot seas. For your Saturday, northwesterlies across the central and southern parts of the inside passage, 15 knots and 3 foot seas there. West to northwesterlies also coming down the outer coast, 15 to 20, and you're looking at about 4 to as high as 7 foot seas there, the highest of which will be outside the Dixon entrance on Saturday. For Friday in south central, small seas and light winds in all areas. Prince William Sound, southwesterlies 10 knots, 2 foot seas, westerlies outside of Hitchinbrook entrance across the northern Gulf. Light winds outside of Resurrection Bay over the Barrens, 15 knots with 3 foot seas in both regions. Across the Cook Inlet region all the way up to the north, 10 knots, a light southerly breeze and 2 foot seas there on Friday. You'll see a little bit of a shift in the wind, a little bit more westerly flow crossing over the Kenai Peninsula and into Prince William Sound for Saturday. We'll keep our highest winds only at 15 knots around the Barrens with 3 to 4 foot seas there for Saturday. For Bristol Bay, easterlies blowing through 20 knots and 3 foot seas, otherwise 15 to 20 in just about every other part of the map here. Shelikof Strait looking at 15 knots and 3 foot seas. Southeasterlies from Kodiak Island down toward Akiak, Perryville, Sand Point, 5 to 6 foot sea expected there on Friday. As we get into Saturday, look for higher seas and stronger winds coming in, 20 to 25, so not a huge increase. Easterly wind continues across Shelikof Strait. You'll see smallest seas there, and otherwise 7 to 8 foot seas expected around the south and eastern side of Kodiak Island. 4 to 5 foot seas across the Bering Sea coast, all in that 20 to 25 knot wind. For the western chain, a 15 to 20 knot wind there, 7 to 8 foot seas expected. Looking for south and westerly winds around Adak and Atka, 15 to 20 knots, 4 to 8 foot seas on either side. And a south and easterly wind from Nikolsky to Unalaska, 10 to 15 knot winds and 2 to 5 foot seas there for your Friday. For Saturday, broader south and westerly flows coming in from Kiska to Adak and Atka, 15 to 20 knots, looking at 4 to as high as 6 foot seas in the region. For the central and eastern chain, you're still looking at a southeasterly flow, a 10 to 15 knot wind, and about 3 to 6 foot seas at their highest for Saturday. For the west coast, a broad offshore flow continues as high pressure sitting across western Alaska. Look for 15 to 20 knot winds, 3 to as high as 7 foot seas, the highest of which would be at around St. Matthew. An easterly flow around Norton Sound, small seas there with 10 knot winds, only looking at 2 foot seas, and 3 to 4 foot seas from the Pribilovs to the Kuskokwim Delta on Friday. For Saturday, a southeasterly flow picks up a little bit more. You'll notice that closer to the coastline around Makoriak, Nunivak Island, and all the way down toward the Kuskokwim Delta and Bristol Bay. You'll see the brighter pinks and purples here indicating a slightly higher sea on our gauge. Look for 10 knot winds to continue inside of Norton Sound. Not too bad there. St. Matthew up to 20 knots. St. Paul and St. George looking at southerlies at 15 knots with a 5 foot sea. Across the Beaufort Seacoast on Friday, westerlies blowing near the shore, 20 knots there over the ice still. And Chukchi Coast looking at south and westerlies, 15 knots with 2 to 3 foot seas. Southeasterlies just south of the Bering Strait, 15 knots and 3 foot seas there. Saturday, that southerly flow picks up a little bit more, up to 20 knots there from Wainwright down toward Point Hope, Point Lay, and all the way down toward Kotzebue Sound. You're looking at about 3 to 4 foot seas over the ice, 10 to 15 knot winds from the west and the southwest. Anytime you want to check out these maps, do so. Weather.gov/Anchorage and click on the TV icon as you go down below the map. You'll see a little TV picture there with maps that look like this. Click on that and you can access those anytime you like. Tonight, looking at that front that we've been watching across the Brooks Range drop and stall out. Along that boundary, we expect to see some areas of light rainfall there, nothing too significant. Watching for showers across parts of southeast. As we get into Friday, look for high pressure sitting across the Seward Peninsula. Low pressure will start to fall off that frontal boundary across the east, and that'll keep some showers focused around the Brooks Range with high pressure out to the east. Don't expect a whole lot of shower or thunderstorm activity close to Alaska tonight or tomorrow. Low pressure is going to keep a low deck of clouds and fog across most of the Bering Sea. We'll start to bring up southerly winds and showers across the west coast. Most of the interior, south central, southwest, and southeast stays dry.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.